بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين. Continuing on with what we were speaking about in regards to certain views opposing logic and some ulama who were hostile towards logic, and we did mention that there have been some kind of like repackaging of different critiques against logic. Someone might have said something 800-900 years ago, and then someone kind of like mentioned it but with a little bit of a twist. So they're pretty much the overall general kind of critiques against logic, which we did mention what they were, and I'll be mentioning them again in this session. But I think one of the things that can be presented in very simple wordings that might in itself sound to be a strong argument as a misconception against logic, which is that if logic was such a perfect science, and if logic really did give you that ability to think correctly and think critically and be 100% accurate in the knowledge that you have, then why is it that we have some scholars, some logicians and philosophers who are just straight out wrong? Why can we rely on something that wasn't even beneficial to these very scholars who were proponents of logic? So if logic was so good and it made you think with such precision, then why are there so many of these logicians and philosophers who have made big mistakes or might differ in their views between one another? I don't think I'll answer that question at the moment, but or answer this misconception at the moment, but it's something that has continuously been said. I would like you to look into this particular issue, and Allama Tabatabai, interestingly, rahmatullahi alayh, he has a very long kind of answer to this. But in principle, I believe that one of the issues that we do have is that if you make a human mistake, you can't blame it on ilm. If you were not kind of accurate enough in your forming of an argument, or you mixed between certain things, or your muqaddim, your sughra, your kubra, your minor premise, your major premise, all these other things that you need to be observant of when you are forming an argument, it wasn't done in the correct process. And if that was wrong, for argument's sake, if it was wrong, you can't condemn a whole ilm in its entirety just because of a logician making a blunder or a mistake or something like that. Now, coming back to those who opposed logic, we can sum them up, as we mentioned, into four, and they said that there's nothing wrong with it, but there's no benefit to it. And even some of our great Shia ulama had mentioned something like this. We did quote we did mention Al-Mullah Muhammad Amin Al-Astarabadi, the founder of the Akhbari trend in the Shia world, over 400 years ago. There have been some statements attributed to him against philosophy. We can also see that someone like Al-Shahid Al-Thani rahmatullahi alayh has also said that there's not really much of a benefit in logic. Another view is those who opposed the validity of logic, and they rejected the very presence of logic. Then you have those who rejected and opposed logic because they said, well, the founder of logic was not a Muslim. The science of logic is foreign to Islam, and the intention of introducing Islam was to infiltrate into the Muslim Ummah and destroy Islam from within itself, you know. And you know, why would we need to go west and east if we have the Quran right there in front of us, and we have the Sunnah among us, you know, the Sunnah of Ahlul Bayt among us. So there's no need to go anywhere else, you know, especially if it's a foreign science, especially if it's from Aristotle, and especially if Aristotle was at a time where he wasn't even a Muslim, or he wasn't did not adhere to any kind of religion, or he praised the Athenian gods and all these other things, you know, that have been mentioned. On the counter argument, there are ulama who praise Aristotle, so much so that they even believe, some ulama, but even believe, you know, based on certain hadiths that they make reference to, that Aristotle was even a Nabi. Kana Nabiyan wa jahilahu qawmuh. He was a prophet, but his qawm, his people, you know, were not familiar. They neglected him. They didn't know him, you know. Anyway, there's this other side of the argument as well. But this is also, I don't want to confuse you by mentioning these things, but this is also the other side of all of this, you know. And what I want to get to is how much we are able to use logic, not only in ulum Islamiyya, but also in our daily life as well, you know. And I think the second point is more important, because the first point is just for a smaller group of people, but the second point is, of course, important for everyone, you know, whichever field you may in, and you've got a little bit of spare time on your hands, you know, and you want to kind of like feel something new, you know. You don't want to be that same person every day with the typical routine. No, you want to venture into new territory, you know. You can do this with logic, because logic is going to open up a lot of things for you. Then after the third one was, they believed that because it was foreign to Islam, it shouldn't be accepted. And then those who believed, number 4, is those who just believed that, you know, you only need a certain amount of logic and then you just throw it away. You know, you don't need to go and delve into it any further. You should not occupy yourself too much with logic. Now, I also came across a book by a Zaydi scholar whose name was Muhammad ibn Ibrahim al-Wazir al-San'ani al-Yamani, and he died in the year 840 after Hijrah. And he has a book called Tarjihu Asalib al-Quran ala Asalib al-Yunan, giving preference of the methodologies of the Quran over the methodology of al-Yunan, of Greece. You know, so giving preference of, you know, the Quranic approach more than giving preference of the Greek approach, ancient Greek, as in philosophy and logic and things like that. And he says that, you know, you need to give preference to the Quran and Ahlul Bayt over anything else, especially when it comes to rejection of Asalib al-Yunan, or the ancient Greek methodology. Now, when I come across these kind of issues, and when I do read into these books, I can clearly see how logical the approach is, but how much fallacies there are as well. And so, even though Ibn Taymiyyah writes a book, Al-Raddu ala al-Mantaqiyin, even though this scholar Al-San'ani al-Yamani writes this book, Tarjih Asalib al-Quran ala Asalib al-Yunan, even though there might be some of our own Shia Ithna Ashari scholars who might be against philosophy as far as saying, you know, even though it might be a valid science, but there's not really much benefit to it, or rejecting it completely altogether, you know, within their very arguments, they are using logic. You know, they are coming up with a qiyas. You know, they're using minor premise, major premise, and a result. You know, they're using burhan, they are using jadal, they are using all of these things that you are studying and researching about in logic itself. You know, and let me just share with you a really interesting story, and by this story you'll be able to understand why it's important, you know, for you to look into many areas in logic, you know, if you don't want to do all of it. But one area is the area of fallacy or mughalata, you know, and this is more than enough to trigger you into wanting to, you know, further your study in this, you know. And in mughalata, you see fallacies everywhere. You know, you are able to pick up on a fallacy very, very easily, even though it's presented in such a flowery, nice way, even though it's very confusing, even though you might not really know the answer, but you just know that it's wrong. There were two people who came to a teacher, and well, the story goes that a student asked his teacher, what is Sufism, and who were the Sophists? Al-Sufista'iyya, or what we say Safsata, was a group prior to Socrates, and they were promoting hikmah, wisdom. Sufism itself means wisdom, hikmah. And due to their lack of having strong grounds in rational studies and logic and things like that, you know, they fell into certain misconceptions, you know, and they became famous to be the founders of skepticism. And when you say Sufism, it means, you know, having arguments that, you know, end up as a fallacy. Anyway, so he said, you know, to his teacher, can you tell me who are the Sophists? What is Sufism? What is this Sufista'iyya? And the teacher said, well, I'll give you this analogy, and then that's how I will explain it to you. I have two guests. One guest is clean, and the other guest is dirty. And if I was to ask these two guests to go and have a shower, who do you think from these two guests would comply and say, well, I'll have a shower? He said, well, obviously, the student said, well, obviously the dirty one is going to say that they'll have a shower. The teacher said, no, the clean one is going to have a shower, because the clean one values cleanliness. The clean one is used to cleanliness, and the dirty one doesn't appreciate what cleanliness means, so the dirty one wouldn't even care whether he has a shower or not. The student said, oh, okay. So then the teacher said, so who do you think is going to have a shower? Then the student said, okay, well, the clean one is going to have a shower. Then the teacher said, no, the dirty one is going to have a shower, because the clean person doesn't need a shower because he's clean. It's the dirty person that needs to have a shower. Okay, so then the teacher said, so who do you think is going to have a shower? And the student said, okay, the dirty one is going to have a shower. Then the teacher said, no, both of them are going to have a shower. And the dirty one is going to have a shower because he needs a shower. The clean one is going to have a shower because he's used to having a shower. And then the student said, okay. And then the teacher asked, now, tell me who is going to have a shower. The student said, both of them are going to have a shower. And then the teacher said, no, neither of them will have a shower, because the dirty person is not used to showering and the clean person doesn't need a shower. The student got a little bit agitated, annoyed by all this playing around with who's having a shower, who's not having a shower. And then the teacher said, this is what safsata is. This is what a fallacy argument is based on. Another story. Again, this is all to do with mughalata, and where are you able to find, where the mughalata is here. There was a student that asked his teacher, I want you to teach me the skill of fallacy arguments, the skill of mughalata. I want to master it. And the teacher said, okay. And then he said, what about, let's agree with the payment. The student said, well, this is how we're going to do it. When I win my first court case, and that's, the fen of jidal, by the way. If those who know a little bit about logic, you'll understand the fen, the art of the skill of jidal, or dialectic arguing. And the student said, when I finish my first court case, when I win it over my opponent, I will pay you the full fee. So if I win in my first court case, then I'll pay you the fee. The teacher said, okay. He taught him how to master the skill of mughalata, of fallacy arguments. And a while passed, and the teacher didn't hear anything from the student. So he saw the student and he said, you know what, hey, you haven't paid me yet. What's going on? And I'll take you to court. And so the student said, okay, well, look, if you take me to court and you win in court, then that means you haven't taught me how to master the skill of mughalata, and therefore you don't get paid, you're not entitled to any payment. And if you lose in court, that means the court will rule in favor of me and you won't get paid. And then the teacher turned around and said, okay, well, look, if I win in court, then the court is going to rule in favor of me and I do get paid. And if you win in court, then that means it's going to be your first victory in a court case, and that means I'm going to be entitled to get paid. So the student gave him two options, two scenarios that were going to happen. And in both scenarios, the teacher doesn't get paid. And then the teacher gave the student two scenarios in what was going to happen in the court. And in both scenarios, the teacher was going to get paid. This is also another example of, a simple example of a fallacious argument. And of course, we're able to look into many other different kinds of fallacies as well, as far as ilm al-mantiq is concerned, which is what ilm al-mantiq deals with, you know, but in more depth, in more understanding. And that's why logic is so important. You know, it's going to let you classify, it's going to let you categorize, it's going to let you think between the lines, it's going to let you have a clearer thought and understanding. You're going to analyze the language and the words, and you're going to distinguish between the terms, and you're going to organize your thoughts, and you're going to be a little bit in the beginning, but then later on when you master it, you're going to be more skilled in this whole way of looking at things in a particular way that would better your process of understanding. Inshallah, we'll continue on speaking about why you should study logic in our next session. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.